There are growing concerns around digital security after a number of recent cyber problems for several major Canadian institutions, including some in the Ottawa region. The NCC, Hydro-Quebec, and the Prime Minister's websites have all been experiencing issues recently. The Cornwall Hospital too, which it says didn't impact its clinical health records. Here to unpack digital threats and the risks is Claudiu Popa. He's the author of the Canadian Cyber Fraud Handbook and a certified cybersecurity and privacy expert with Data Risk Canada. Claudiu, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, Nicole. Thanks for having me on the show.
Why do these cyber attacks keep happening, and why now?
Well, there are different reasons for these kinds of things. There are certainly trends. There are current events. As the Prime Minister correctly pointed out, whenever there's a news event that's worth protesting, some people will protest by, let's say, impacting a website or taking down a web page or hacking into an organization just to try to make a point and to certainly get some exposure. So there are different reasons for cyber attacks, but the main one and the most damaging one is still the ransomware attack, which of course we know is financially motivated. But our viewers should know that there's a vast panoply of different reasons and different types of attacks.
And how are, I guess, attackers able to do this? Because these are some, pretty high-profile websites they're going after.
So it's interesting because a lot of the high-profile websites, or what we think of as high-profile websites, are simply web pages that are hosted on an unprotected web server. We make a distinction between unprotected web servers, which might just be a web page that lists information or events or announcements. We call that type of thing brochureware, for lack of better words. And in many cases, those sites tend to be unprotected. The sites that are operational, the websites where you typically see a login button, the sites where there's usually a database behind it, where usually there's user information or customer data or patient information, those sites are critical and they're operational. Those are the ones that need to be protected, and they need to be protected using something called a website firewall, as you might expect.
When it comes to those operational websites then, where there's user data, there's a login, right? I'm thinking of Hydro-Quebec, I'm thinking of, just even patients with the Cornwall Hospital, there have been claims, obviously, that this hasn't impacted their information. But what do you say to people who are still worried that their data has been shared or compromised?
It's definitely a concern. And so the public needs to ask the right questions. Of course, from the perspective of the organization, it's always difficult to prove a negative. You can never prove for sure that you haven't been breached or that somebody has not accessed your information. But we do need to understand that if there's no evidence of a breach, then that's the best we can do. In the cases of the utility, the Hydro-Quebec, that was simply the takedown of a web page. So web pages and the utilities that they represent are two different things. And the website that was taken down was simply just the front end. So that was made to intimidate. That is obviously designed to embarrass the organization and to say, hey, you know what, we could have done so much more. That's not necessarily true, and we mustn't panic about that. In the case of the hospital, however, that sounded like it was a network penetration. It was a hack. And that type of hacking incident is always a concern because there's patient information, because there's sensitive information on the internal network. We need to know a lot more about that because that's an actual data breach that likely needs to be reported to privacy commissioners and other regulators.
You talked about the needs for a firewall, right, or some level of protection. What more can these institutions, hospitals, companies, what more can they be doing to prevent these types of attacks in the future?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The simple answer is every website, regardless of whether it's operational or just informational needs to be behind a web application firewall. These are services that are available to anyone. In many cases, individuals can open up a website and sign up for a free protection behind some of these plans. It's affordable, it's trivial, and every organization needs to have a web application firewall protecting their site. If not, even if they don't have user data or a financial database to protect, they still have a reputational impact, and the public will always attribute trust or lack of trust based on the fragility of a website. So all companies need to worry about this and should sign up for a web application firewall. And secondly, you need to have some kind of monitoring for those websites. And in order to be able to prepare for any sort of attack, whether it's just a denial of service or whether it's an actual hack, you need to be able to test the security of these sites. All too many Canadian organizations wait to be hit first and then respond afterwards once either their reputation or their data have been compromised, unfortunately.
All right, Claudiu, unfortunately that is all the time we have for, but thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure.
Claudiu Popa is a cybersecurity and privacy expert with Data Risk Canada.